Picture this. A house elf breaks into a bedroom, physically assaults a 12-year-old kid, and begs him not to go back to the one place that actually makes him happy. That's how Chamber of Secrets opens, and it somehow gets darker from there. A monster older than Hogwarts itself, a diary that writes back, a snake that can kill you just by looking at you. Today we're breaking down every twist, every clue, and every piece of foreshadowing in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, how it all connects, what it's really about, and why this is the film where the wizarding world stopped being cute and started being scary. Vifiari. Let's get into it. We open on Privet Drive, and immediately the film reminds us Harry's home life is miserable. The Dursleys are hosting a dinner for the Masons. A couple Uncle Vernon is trying to impress for a business deal, and Harry has been ordered to stay invisible for the entire night. Before the dinner even starts, though, something small and blue-skinned is sitting on Harry's bed. Dobby is one of the strangest introductions in the whole franchise. A house elf serving the Malfoy family who sneaks into Harry's room to deliver a warning: Harry must not return to Hogwarts this year because a terrible plot is being set in motion. Dobby won't say who's behind it, only that it involves danger beyond anything Harry has faced. When Harry refuses to promise he'll stay home, Dobby escalates. He intercepts a letter from Ron. He seals off the barrier to Platform 9, stranding Harry and Ron on the Muggle side. And in one of the film's most quietly devastating moments, Dobby smashes a pudding at the Dursley dinner party, gets Harry blamed for it, and effectively destroys the Mason business deal, all to try to get Harry expelled and safely off the Hogwarts guest list. What makes the sequence work is that Dobby isn't a villain. He's terrified, and he's acting out of loyalty to Harry, even while making Harry's life miserable in the process. It's a strange, comic, slightly tragic opening, and it's the first sign that this story is going to be about someone with almost no power trying to stop something enormous from happening. Locked in his room as punishment, Harry is rescued not by magic but by a flying car. Ron, along with twins Fred and George, arrives in Mr. Weasley's enchanted Fort Anglia and breaks Harry out through the bars on his window. It's a chaotic, joyous jailbreak. And it's also the first time we see the Weasley family home, the Burrow, which stands in total contrast to Privet Drive. Where the Dursleys are cold and controlling, the Burrow is loud, cluttered, magical, and full of warmth. The film is making a quiet argument here. Family isn't about blood, it's about who actually makes room for you. The trip to Diagon Alley to buy school supplies introduces two things that matter enormously later. First, Gilderoy Lockhart, the new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, a preening celebrity author who has built an entire career out of books about his own magical heroics. He's instantly funny, instantly obnoxious, and completely useless in a crisis, which becomes a running joke and eventually a real plot point. Second, and far more important, the Weasleys run into Lucius Malfoy and Flourish and Blots. Arthur Weasley and Lucius Malfoy get into a physical altercation, rooted in old prejudice. The Malfoys look down on the Weasleys for being blood traitors, wizarding families who don't believe in pure blood superiority. During the scuffle, Lucius slips something to Ginny Weasley's cauldron of second-hand schoolbooks. It happens so fast it's easy to miss on a first watch, but it's the single most important action in the entire film. That object is a diary, and that diary is about to become the engine of the whole plot. This is worth pausing on because it's a masterclass in planting a clue in plain sight. The film shows you the exact moment the weapon gets placed, tells you nothing about what it is, and then doesn't bring it up again for nearly 20 minutes of story time. By the time it matters, most viewers have completely forgotten it happened. Back at King's Cross, Harry and Ron find the barrier to Platform 9 sealed Dobby's doing, and with the train about to leave, they make a reckless decision: fly Mr. Weasley's car straight to Hogwarts. It's a sequence that's pure childhood wish fulfillment chaos, right up until they crash directly into the Whomping Willow, a tree that responds to being hit by trying to beat them to death. They survive, barely, but arrive at school already in trouble, having been spotted flying a car across the country by muggles below. It's a small thing, but it sets the tone. This year, Harry and Ron keep getting into trouble for the right reasons, while the real danger goes unnoticed by the adults in charge. Once term starts, we get Lockhart officially established as a fraud in everything but self-promotion. His class is a disaster, and in a memorable scene, he unleashes a cage of Cornish pixies he can't control, leaving Harry, Ron, and Hermione to clean up the mess. Then, on Halloween night, everything changes. Harry starts hearing a voice that no one else can hear, a cold, murderous voice moving through the walls, saying it wants to kill. Following the sound, Harry, Ron, and Hermione discover Filch's cat, Mrs. Norris, hanging petrified from a torch bracket, water flooding the corridor beneath her, and on the wall behind her, written in blood, "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware." This is the moment the film shifts gears completely. Filch immediately accuses Harry, since he was found at the scene, And it's Dumbledore's intervention that stops things from escalating. But the damage is done. The school starts treating Harry with suspicion, and we get our first real explanation of what's actually going on. According to legend, one of the four Hogwarts founders, Salazar Slytherin, believed only pure-blood wizards should be allowed to study magic. When the other founders disagreed, he supposedly built a hidden chamber somewhere in the castle, containing a monster that only his true heir could control, a monster meant to purge the school of Muggle-born students. For decades, this was dismissed as myth. Now, with Mrs. Norris petrified, and that message on the wall, the myth suddenly looks very real. This is where the film does something genuinely clever with its central mystery. It makes Harry himself look like a legitimate suspect. In Lockhart's dueling club, set up ostensibly to teach students self-defense, Draco Malfoy summons a snake during a duel with Harry, and Harry, without understanding why, starts speaking Parseltongue, the language of snakes, commanding it to back down. To everyone watching, it looks like he's ordering the snake to attack. Parseltongue is established as an extremely rare, historically dark ability associated specifically with Salazar Slytherin's bloodline. Suddenly, Harry isn't just a witness to the mystery, he's a plausible suspect in his own story. This is a huge storytelling risk, and it pays off because it recontextualizes Harry's entire relationship to the plot. He's not just investigating the chamber, he has to prove he's not the one who opened it. It also deepens something set up back in the first film, the Sorting Hat's hesitation over whether to put Harry in Slytherin. That detail, which seemed like throwaway color in Philosopher's Stone, is now doing real narrative work. Around this point, Harry, Ron, and Hermione also learn about the last time the chamber was supposedly opened 50 years earlier. A student died, and the school was almost shut down before the culprit was allegedly caught. That detail becomes crucial later. Hermione, ever the strategist, proposes brewing Polyjuice Potion, an extremely advanced, technically banned potion that lets the drinker transform into someone else entirely for a limited time. Her plan: disguise herself, Harry and Ron as Slytherin students so they can interrogate Draco Malfoy directly, since he's the prime suspect as the presumed heir of Slytherin. The potion brewing itself becomes a fun structural device. It takes a month to prepare, which lets the film skip through time while attacks continue to escalate in the background. When the trio finally uses the potion, Harry and Ron transform into two Slytherin goons, Crabbe and Goyle, and successfully get Malfoy talking. But the interrogation backfires in the most important way possible. Malfoy reveals he has no idea who the heir of Slytherin actually is, and that his father hasn't told him either. It's a huge red herring resolved. Malfoy is arrogant and prejudiced, but he's innocent of the actual crime. The mystery has to look elsewhere. Meanwhile, Hermione's version of the potion goes wrong. She accidentally used a hair from Millicent Bulstrode's cat instead of the girl herself, and spends weeks recovering from a partial cat transformation in the hospital wing. It's comic relief, but it also quietly reinforces the story's obsession with transformation, identity, and things not being what they appear to be, a theme that becomes central to the entire mystery. This is where the film's real engine kicks back into gear. Harry finds the diary Lucius Malfoy planted in Ginny's cauldron, the one from Flourish and Blots, and discovers it's blank, except that when he writes in it, the ink sinks in and a response writes itself back. The diary belongs to a former Hogwarts student named Tom Marvolo Riddle, and using it, Harry is pulled into a memory, a magical flashback to 50 years earlier, showing the exact moment the chamber was last opened, and the moment a student named Hagrid was expelled for allegedly opening it, accused of keeping an illegal, dangerous creature. This sequence does enormous work. It gives us Hagrid's backstory and explains why he was expelled without completing his education. It shows us the previous chamber incident wasn't actually resolved the way everyone believed, and it introduces Tom Riddle as a charming, seemingly heroic figure who supposedly caught the culprit and saved the school. Except, and this is the reveal, the entire film has been building toward, it's a lie. Tom Riddle isn't the hero of that story. He's the villain of this one. The diary itself is a fragment of Riddle's younger self, magically preserved, and he's been manipulating events from the moment Ginny first started writing in it at the start of the year. Ginny, isolated and lonely as the only girl in a house full of brothers, had been pouring her feelings into the diary all term, and Riddle had been using that connection to slowly possess her, using her body to open the chamber, release the monster, and carry out the attacks, all while she had no memory of doing any of it. While the mystery deepens, several attacks escalate the stakes. Hermione herself is petrified after apparently looking at something reflected in a small mirror she was carrying, a detail that becomes the key to identifying the monster later, since it means she saw the creature's reflection, not the creature directly, and survived. This is the story quietly giving the audience the answer before it explains the question. Professor Sprout has been growing mandrake plants specifically because their mature roots, once harvested, can be brewed into a draught of restoration capable of reviving the petrified victims. But the mandrakes need months to mature, creating a hard deadline hanging over the entire back half of the story. Around this time, Ron and Harry also follow a trail of spiders fleeing the school into the Forbidden Forest, where they meet Aragog, a giant, ancient acromantula that Hagrid raised in secret decades earlier. The same dangerous creature he was accused of hiding and controlling as the supposed chamber monster. Aragog confirms something huge. He is not the monster of the chamber. He is terrified of it. He tells them he's never even seen it directly, only heard it, and that everyone who has ever looked directly into its eyes has died. This scene does double duty. It clears Hagrid's name completely, and it drops the single biggest clue about the true monster's identity. Whatever it is, it kills through eye contact alone. The story accelerates hard here. Ginny stops behaving like herself for weeks, distant, anxious, guilt-ridden, and it's later revealed this is because she's been fighting Riddle's possession the entire time, half aware something is deeply wrong but unable to stop it or tell anyone. In a moment of horror, she's finally taken into the chamber itself, and a message on the wall declares her skeleton will lie in the chamber forever. Harry finally pieces together the mechanics. The diary is a weapon. It's been controlling Ginny, and the heir of Slytherin was never a living student stalking the halls. It was Tom Riddle, acting through her the entire time. With McGonagall preparing to shut the school down and send students home, Harry and Ron use information from Aragog and a stolen page confession to figure out the chamber's entrance is in the girls' bathroom on the second floor, the one haunted by Moaning Myrtle, a student who, it turns out, died there 50 years ago. She was the original chamber victim. Her death is what the monster caused the first time it was released, and Tom Riddle was the one who released it. Harry, Ron, and Lockhart dragged along and exposed as a complete fraud who's been faking his entire career of heroic exploits using memory charms to steal other people's accomplishments, descend into the chamber together. Lockhart's cowardice is finally paid off here. He tries to obliviate Harry and Ron with Ron's broken wand, which backfires and wipes his own memory instead, and a cave-in separates Ron from Harry, leaving Harry to go on alone. Harry finds Ginny unconscious, and Tom Riddle, now appearing as a full memory, given form and strength by draining Ginny's life force through the diary, reveals the entire plan. He is, in fact, the future Lord Voldemort, and this is one of the film's most important reveals. Voldemort's real name, his half-blood heritage as the descendant of Salazar Slytherin through his mother's side, and his lifelong obsession with proving pure blood supremacy despite not being pure blood himself. It's a detail that recontextualizes the entire ideology driving the villain. His cause is built on a lie about his own identity. Then Riddle summons the monster, a basilisk, a giant serpent whose direct gaze kills instantly, and whose indirect gaze reflection or a glancing look causes petrification instead of death. This is the payoff to Hermione's mirror and Aragog's warning delivered simultaneously. Fawkes, Dumbledore's phoenix, arrives with a sorting hat and gouges out the basilisk's eyes, neutralizing the direct kill threat and giving Harry an opening. The sorting hat produces the Sword of Gryffindor, established as an object that only reveals its true contents to a true Gryffindor, tying back to Harry's earlier anxiety about nearly being sorted into Slytherin. Harry kills the basilisk in a brutal, close-quarters fight, but is bitten in the process, poisoned by the creature's venom, which the film has established as instantly fatal. In the film's most emotionally loaded moment, Fawkes cries into Harry's wound. Phoenix tears have healing properties and saves his life. Harry then uses a basilisk fang to stab straight through the diary itself, destroying it. Tom Riddle's memory form screams and disintegrates. Ginny wakes up, restored, with no memory of what she did while possessed. Back above ground, everything gets tied off. Dumbledore, who had been removed from Hogwarts earlier in the film by a suspicious school board vote engineered by Lucius Malfoy, is reinstated. Hagrid, who had been sent to Azkaban on suspicion despite being innocent, is released and cleared. The petrified students, including Hermione and Mrs. Norris, are nearly every strange or throwaway detail, the sorting hat's hesitation, Harry's Parseltongue ability, Hermione's mirror, Aragog's fear, the diary's placement in Diagon Alley, turns out to be a deliberately planted clue that only makes sense in hindsight. It's also the film where the series' central conflict stops being abstract. Voldemort isn't just a name whispered in fear anymore. We now understand exactly what he believes, why he believes it, and how far back his plans actually go. And underneath all of it is a story about a lonely, manipulated kid, Ginny, used as a weapon by someone who understood exactly how to exploit isolation. That's the part that lingers. That's the full breakdown of Chamber of Secrets. Let me know which film you want next.